Welcome back to the channel. A few weeks ago I posted a video when I was rebuilding my RDX and I was pulling off the wheel that was in two pieces. Now originally this was a one-piece design when it left the factory, but the owner decided they prefer the two-piece design, so they had a pull to turn it into a two-piece design. I mentioned something about having to possibly return that wheel for a core charge. I got a lot of comments that said there's no way anybody's going to rebuild that wheel. Now I'm not here to call out those experts and prove them wrong, because they're absolutely right. There is no way anybody was going to rebuild that wheel. But core charges have evolved over the years, and they're not just used to return wheels to be reconditioned to put them back out on the road. So let's talk about core charges. So what is a core charge? Well, it's basically a fee to compel you to give your old non-usable parts back to whatever supplier supplied you with your new or reconditioned usable parts. Now, why do they want your old parts back? Because your broken, damaged, non-usable parts in the hands of a rebuilder become their inventory to sell to the next person. Now, we're not just talking about wheels here. We're talking about all kinds of car parts. Batteries, alternators, starters, pumps of any kind, master cylinders, wheel cylinders, brake calipers, axles, rack and pinions, steering gears, differentials, transfer cases, transmissions, engines, headlights, taillights, bumper covers, steel bumpers, and electrical components of any kind. So all those things are being rebuilt. Not at the rate they once were, because once upon a time, we used to have to rebuild stuff here because supplies were limited. Nowadays, everything is built in a far off land and shipped here at a much cheaper cost than rebuilding it here. So I've explained what core charges are for, I've explained what they charge core charges on, but haven't explained how I think I'm going to get my core charge back on a wheel that clearly can't be reconditioned. And that's because core charges have evolved over the years. Now, if you go to a chain store for auto parts like Advance or AutoZone or Napa or any of those, and you get charged a core on one of the various parts that you bought, chances are it's probably for the same reason they've charged them for the last so many years, because they want your part back that they can recondition and sell back to you. Now, they're really only doing that on high demand parts, because nowadays I've seen a lot of times where even on reconditioned parts, they don't want your old ones back. You can throw them away. And the reason for that is there are core buyers that go around to Salvageards all over the country and buy up all of their old cores, untested parts, broken parts, whatever stuff they took back on cores, whatever they have. And the reason for that is, once upon a time, we used to have local rebuilders that rebuilt various car parts. Here in Chicago, we probably had 50 or 60. Now, I think we have probably 5. Now they ship everything to a centralized location, they rebuild it, and then they ship it out to their distribution centers, and it ends up in your Napa for you to pick up at any time. So they don't need your old stuff to rebuild, because it's not worth shipping it all over the place. Not much has changed in the auto parts industry. They're still charging core charges for the same reason they always have. However, the manufacturers who sell through dealers have changed a little bit. Now, if you buy a part, like a mechanical part, an engine, transmission, steering gear, whatever, they're probably charging the core charge for the same reason they always have. However, they've started charging core charges on other parts, such as headlights, taillights, and bumper covers. And the reason for that is exactly the opposite of the reason they're charging it on their mechanical parts. It's not because they want it back to rebuild it. It's because they want to make sure nobody else can. Now, the manufacturers have gotten smart, and they've started putting their logos and names inside of their headlights, taillights, and on their bumpers. You probably think it looks cool, but that's not the real reason it's there. It's there because now that means that aftermarket manufacturers can no longer produce those parts. They can, but they're not going to have those logos in them, which means that if you're an insurance company and you're looking for a replacement part, you have to buy the OE part, because you can't use the ones without the logos in it unless you're a substandard company. But for the most part, most insurance companies are only going to go with the OE. Well, there's only 2 places you can get OE. You can either get used or you can get new. Now, if they're keeping the reconditioned ones from getting out there by buying those cores back, then they aren't out there. They're controlling the supply, which means they control the price. Have no fear, their control over the price is short-lived. After cars have been out for a while, they start finding their way to the salvage yards. And salvage yards sell their parts that are damaged that they can't sell to the general public to people that will recondition them and put them back out on the market. Now, once they do that, there's more of a supply, and dealers have to start dropping their prices to compete with their new competitors that are now releasing those parts, which is why you might see a part on a car that's current model year has a core charge on it, 5 years down the road, that same part might not have a core charge because they're already out there and the price has already seeked its lowest value, and it's not going to go any lower if more of it gets out there. It's not worth the manufacturer's time to reclaim those parts, so they just let them go. And that explains why I can give a wheel that's in 2 pieces back to the dealer and they're still going to give my core charge back. They'll take bumpers and headlights that are in boxes and shrapnel because they're not making sure that they can rebuild it. They're just making sure nobody else can. So if it's just a box of parts, that's all they care about. It's the same to them as if you sent them a whole headlight that just had a little scuff in the side of it. And those headlights with the little scuffs in the corner that are easily reconditioned are the dealer's worst nightmare, because those are the ones that are definitely going to end up back out on the street after they're reconditioned, and thus affecting the price of the dealer's golden parts. But dealers and auto parts stores are not the only ones charging core charges. Lately, Salvageards have jumped on the core charge bandwagon, and the reason they do it is a little bit different. I mean, they're still charging the core charges because they want those cores back to in turn sell them to the core buyers. But there's a few other reasons. So I guess there's really only one reason, and that's to make money. But there's kind of different ways they make money, so I'll explain. And we'll use this wheel for an example. The wheel was $200. That's what it was advertised as. But they don't tell you, the fine print, that there is a $75 core charge. Well, if you bring your old wheel back, no problem. It's a $200 wheel. However, if you don't have a wheel to give to them, then it's now a $275 wheel. Now, if you called them because they were the lowest price in town, now they might not be the lowest price in town. They kind of snuck that little fee in there. And if you don't have a wheel to give them back because you had a theft recovery, well, now you got a $275 wheel. Are you going to leave and go get another one somewhere else, or are you just going to take the $275 wheel? Well, that's up to you. But they might make a little money there. Worst case scenario, I hand them my 2-piece wheel, they look at it, and they toss it out back in the scrap pile. And then they get $20, $25 for that wheel, depending on what aluminum's going for. And that's $20 or $25 they wouldn't have if they didn't require that core charge. Pretty easy to make money. Really didn't come out of my pocket, although I don't get to throw it in a pile. I get to throw it in their pile. Another way they can use your core charge to make a few bucks is, let's say that you bought a transmission with a $50 core, but you don't have the old one out just yet. So you take your transmission home and you swap it out. Now maybe you're doing it on nights and weekends after work or whatever, and it takes you a week or two before you get that new transmission in and the old one out. Once it's all done, you take it back to the salvage yard and you get your $50 core charge back and you drop off your old transmission. Now, they got to sit on your $50 that whole time that you were swapping out the transmission. Now, it might not sound like a lot, but imagine there's 100 other people just like you. That's right, they're sitting on $5,000 of interest-free money that they only are liable for when you bring that core back. Now, let's say you bring that core back outside of the window, which is 30, 60, 90 days, depending on what yard you're using. If you don't get it in that window, they don't have to give you your core charge back. So they get to keep your money. And then there's always the accounting error. Some yards like to not actually issue the credit until you call and follow up on it. So if you're not paying attention and don't think about it, you may never get your core charge back. Most of the time they're pretty good about it and they do refund it right away. Now, if you're one of those people that hate capitalism and think that Salvageards shouldn't be making this extra money, I got some good news for you. There's some times where they lose. And I had a perfect example the other day. I bought a rear differential for a Lexus RX 330 and they delivered it to me. I swapped it out, called them up, and they came to pick up my core. Now, a Lexus rear differential is not hard to come by. They fit a bunch of different makes and models and years, and they're everywhere. They're actually really cheap. So they're not going to get any money from a core buyer. Nobody's going to rebuild it. All they get is scrap value. Scrap value on that thing, because it's so small and it's not made out of aluminum, is probably like $5. So I guarantee you that paying the driver, paying for the truck, paying for the fuel costs them more than the $5 they're getting back. So if you have a little business sense, you might have already figured out that the best thing the yard could have done was say, here's a refund, keep the part, just throw it out, we don't need it back. But there's a couple underlying factors of why they didn't do that. And this part in particular, it's because the yard that I ordered the part from is not the actual yard that the part came from. I ordered it from a yard that I deal with all the time that delivers to me up in Chicago. They belong to a network of other yards, and the other yard that had this part that I wanted is in their network. So if I were to buy that part from them, I would have had to go down and get it because they don't deliver it to me, and it's like 100, 150 miles away. Now, in this network, they're always transferring parts between each other, so they transfer it up here and then they bring it to me. It doesn't actually cost me anything. It's the same price as if I had ordered it from them. And then the original yard charged the core charge. So they charge it to the one that delivered to me and so on down the line. So they need to recover it just for them. So that's why it worked out that way. Now, another reason that they do it is because counter people don't always know exactly what a part is worth. Now, it's pretty obvious that this is a, very abundant part that's not going to be rebuilt, that there are tons of out there, and it's just going in the scrap pile. But they don't know that. I mean, it could be a very valuable engine that, the core buyer might pay thousands of dollars for. So just so that they don't miss out on those $1,000 cores, they just bring everything back. Sometimes you're going to win, sometimes you're going to lose. So that's why they do it. So if you have a salesman that's been around for a while and is allowed to make executive decisions, a lot of times they'll waive that core charge just to save their company some money because they know that that core is not going to be rebuilt and that it has no value to them and it's going to cost them money. But for the most part, they aren't allowed to make those choices and they just take the loss. Hopefully you guys learned a little bit about what core charges are and how they're used, and why I can get my money back for a wheel that's in two pieces and clearly can't be rebuilt. And if I didn't do a very good job explaining it, you're probably still wondering what a core charge is. Now, this is all based on my experience in the United States. I don't know what goes on in the rest of the world, so leave me a comment down below if things are done differently in your country. Do you guys have core charges, and how do you work them? And if you want to know anything else about the rebuilding industry and all the little odds and ends that it entails, I do have 35 years experience rebuilding cars, so let me know what you want to learn about and I can possibly make a video on it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.